Good morning, my name is Chris and this is my video presentation for WMUS 303, The Dynamics of Worship Leading. This presentation will cover what we've learned over the past 8 weeks from the books by Julie Barrier and Greg Shear, as well as video presentations and interviews that Dr. Newman has conducted with worship leaders from across the country. I'm sitting here in South Texas. It's about 3:30 a.m. About 80 degrees, a little wind blowing, and this is where my assignment has been for most of these 4 weeks, helping people that have become sick through this pandemic. Behind me you'll see the ambulance that I'm here with. It is one that we brought from Arkansas, about 960 miles away. And looking forward to getting back home and being with family. But these past 8 weeks have covered quite a bit about leading worship, and also the interviews covered a lot, not just basic principles and techniques, but the heart of leading worship as well. Not just from a worship pastor's perspective, but also from an administrator's perspective. First, one of the key things is to prepare the worship ministry itself. Not all churches have large groups, choirs, ensembles, orchestras. Some may only have a praise team, like the church that I attend and lead worship at. But for those larger worship ministries, they may be required to have officers. A worship pastor should select the officers or encourage officers to be nominated who are within those ensembles, whether it be the choir or the orchestra. Julie Barrier says, as the people are utilized according to their giftedness and desire, they assume more responsibility for rehearsal behavior, planning, evaluation, and faithfulness. Selecting people to be officers helps to develop them as leaders, and it also helps to foster fellowship with between those leaders and the worship pastor. Of course, those leaders may be either appointed by the worship pastor or they may be nominated by those within the ensembles. When they're nominated and when they're appointed, it also helps to encourage growth within the ensembles and growth of those leaders of the ensembles. One great advantage of having leaders within the ensembles is to help lighten the load of the worship ministry leaders, which also has the effect of allowing the worship ministry leaders to lighten the load of the church leadership. When the load for worship pastor is lightened by the ensemble leaders doing more, that gives the worship pastor an opportunity to go out into the public with the pastors, into nursing homes and to hospitals, not just from the worship side, but also to pray and to encourage and edify others. The next section, talk about from preparing the worship ministry, is to planning a service. Whether a worship minister is going into a new position or whether they're already in a position, it's helpful to determine what type of worship style that they are using. Whether it's liturgical, liturgical, whether it's thematic, almost contemporary, or whether it's experiential. There's also some churches choose to blend those worship styles. And a worship pastor may choose to blend it by either modernizing current, like liturgical styles, taking hymns such as How Great Thou Art, and making it have a more modern flavor. A worship pastor may choose to substitute elements from one style, like experiential, may substitute some liturgical styles with some from the experiential. Or they may choose to mix or blend those styles. Worship pastors, as they're planning their services, they need to develop techniques to help minimize distractions during the worship service. One of the things they need to do is shape the themes. And the themes can be shaped by using repetition, which uses the same theme throughout each song. How great is our God, how great thou art. Stuff like that. There may be, they may use contrast. Something that talks about the fall of man, man's sinfulness, with the redemption of man. How Christ sacrificed himself so that man may be reconnected with God. Or they may use the shaping style of development, where the songs will tell a story from the first song to the last song, where the first song or two may talk about the fall of man, the next song or two may talk about Christ's sacrifice, and then the final song or two may talk about the redemption. Another technique worship pastors may choose to use is enhancing the flow from one song to the next. Now, flow can be dynamic, where there's motion from one song to the next and from one element of the worship to the next. Or it can be static. There's some elements like a prayer in between songs, or just a moment of silence might cause a little abruptness, a little briefness in between the songs. Another technique that worship pastors want to develop is unity and diversity, using instruments for unity and diversity within the songs. Percussion can create unity or can create diversity between songs, whether they're faster or slower, or the different type of rhythm. And also, with the flow and the unity and diversity, synthesizers or keyboards can use, or computers can use what we call pads, little ambiance in the background, so that there's a continuous flow from one song to the next. Another technique that worship pastors will want to use is modulation, going from one key to the next when songs have different keys. And finally, the last is using transitional elements such as scripture and prayer, using ambiance with keyboards, or using a moment of silence just so the congregation can reflect on the lyrics of the songs. Worship service planning for long term, it's helpful to have a good relationship between the senior pastor and the worship pastor. This allows them to develop the theme of the entire worship service together, where the sermon, the message, the theme of the message is also the theme of the songs. Unfortunately, not every church, I don't want to say that their relationships are bad, but the working relationship where the pastor may not know the theme until later on that week, or may not know the theme until that week of the service, so it's difficult to relay that theme to the worship pastor. But one advantage of developing the theme with the senior pastor is that it reduces the chance of the theme of the songs being different from the theme of the sermon. Having a consistent theme throughout creates unity and doesn't necessarily confuse the congregation. Now, when it comes to rehearsal planning is based off of preparation prior to the rehearsal. This may utilize a mixture of well-known and new songs, a mixture of hymns, videos. Rehearsal planning may be accomplished weeks in advance, or some, unfortunately, have to do it the week of the rehearsal. Worship pastors need to be flexible and fluidic when dealing with their people, their volunteers. They should expect and want to encourage timeliness and attendance. However, they need to be flexible and be ready to change songs if they need to, change people if they need to. Of course, services are more effective when they're planned out over a long period of time. Greg Shear, in chapter 7 of his book, The Art of Worship, suggests that the theme should be at least chosen, may not be narrowed down, but it should at least be chosen about 1 to 6 months out from the service. 1 to 3 months out from the service, the worship planner should start scheduling people. This gives them time to say yes or no, I will be there, no, I'll be on vacation. They'll be able to schedule around being there. From 2 to 4 weeks out, the 2 to 4 weeks is when the worship pastor should start choosing the music and narrowing the theme of the worship service down. About 1 week out, the worship planner should, that's when the tweaking with the minor adjustments, like putting someone else in, maybe changing a song, getting those finer tweaks down to the worship service. A few days from the rehearsal is when the worship pastor should prepare the rehearsal bulletin. Now, the rehearsal bulletin's, of course, going to have the agenda, calendar of events, going to have notes, going to have the song list, the service list. It may include a devotion, or as one of the interviewees said, some nuggets about what about the theme or about lyrics for one of the particular songs. On the day of rehearsal, the worship pastor should prepare the rehearsal agenda and prepare the music packets. On the day of the rehearsal, the worship pastor should ensure that the rehearsal is not only about the songs, about getting everything fine-tuned, working on transitions, but it should also have a spiritual element. Worship pastors should include devotionals. Start out with a song that the whole team can worship to. Make rehearsal as worshipful, if not more worshipful, than the Sunday morning. On the day of the service, that's when sound checks need to be done. Make sure that the choir loft, the platform, the orchestra pit, make sure all of that is nice and neat and ready for the instrumentalists and the singers to be prepared to sing. They should also do sound checks, allow the vocalists and the instruments to warm up, make sure they can hear themselves, and make sure that the sanctuary can hear them. And also, right before the service begins, it's helpful to give the instrumentalists and the vocalists time to relax, use the restroom if they need to, give them time for prayer, even a group prayer. And finally, these are some leadership notes that, as the truck goes by, some leadership notes that I put together from most of the interviews. One is to make the rehearsal a spiritual experience as well as a fellowship experience. One thing that I heard throughout most of the interviewees was that worship leaders should value the time of their worship team members. Ways of doing that is like being organized, having the agendas, calendars, lesson plans, rehearsal plans, parts for the different songs, have it where they can work on it outside of rehearsal. Planning center is one way they can do that. Another tool that I found that has been helpful for me recently is a website called the Worship Initiative. It breaks down specific parts for newer songs, and also does have chord sheets that can be transposed, and it gives lessons. It gives not only the parts, but if a drummer wanted to learn the rhythm for a particular song, they can watch just the drum part, just for that. Let's see. Mr. Hartley, Mr. Ken Hartley said that, worship leaders should be authentic. They should show intentionality, a purpose, and an order of things. They should be flexible, and they should always put people first. Worship leaders should realize that leadership is earned. It's not a position. It's not, hi, I'm worship pastor Chris. Leadership is earned, and it doesn't need the title to have leadership. And one thing that was stressed in Mr. Hartley's interview is that worship leaders are there to make other leaders, not to make followers. Jesus Christ was a perfect example. He developed leaders of his church. They were not just followers. We all aren't just followers of Christ. We are his leaders, helping to bring others to him. Last but not least, I know I'm 19 minutes into this now, is the worship service plan. I devised a theme, a worship service plan over faithfulness, and I will include my notes in with this project on Blackboard. But on faithfulness, the service will open with a welcome opening prayer. And then the first song I've chosen for faithfulness is Your Grace Is Enough by Matt Maurer, followed by Great Things by Phil Wickham. After that would be a scripture reading, followed by the third song, which is Do It Again by Elevation Worship, which goes into a prayer, followed by announcements and the welcoming of new members. Then a special with the choir, the traditional song, It Is Well With My Soul. Of course, then the sermon about God's faithfulness, followed by an altar song, which is the traditional Great Is Thy Faithfulness. And I'll include the link to this one, but there's a great version by Austin Stone Worship on YouTube. And then last is the closing prayer and the closing song, More Upbeat, by Chris Tomlin, the song Forever. Thank you for the privilege to attend this course and to learn about different dynamics of worship leading. I'm especially grateful for the interviews. Books are great, but seeing and hearing worship leading techniques from real life people rather than books, that's just the school lessons can't buy it, or the money can't buy that. But thank you again for this course and for teaching us this, and for the interviews, and for encouraging us. Thank you, and God bless.